Alrighty, here we are, and it's time to get started. So this is going to be the first video in a series that I'm starting called Meet Your Muscles. And I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be super helpful because I know I'm a visual learner myself. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pulling up my 3D anatomy app, and I'm going to be introducing you to the muscles of your body. Now, I know a lot of people had some form of anatomy in high school or college, but let's be honest, you've probably forgotten most of it. And I don't need you to be a PhD when it comes to knowing muscle anatomy. But what I do want you to know is the basics and the biggest muscles and what they do, because when you have issues, when you have pain, when you have problems, when you have plateaus, obviously it's important to know what the muscles are and how to train them. And I'm going to be starting with the muscles below the knee. And the reason I'm going to start is not only because the foot is the foundation of everything, your foot and your calves, but also, in my opinion, when it comes to the most neglected and undertrained muscles in the body, it's the muscles below the knee. Everyone loves training the quads, hamstrings, glutes, abs, chest, lats, but the muscles underneath the knee, when it comes to athletes, when it comes to injured athletes, when it comes to people with pain problems and issues, I believe are severely neglected and undertrained. In fact, most people don't do anything for the muscles of their shin and feet unless they get injured. So this is going to be the first entry. I'm going to show you a ton of examples in my own training. I'm going to break down what the muscles look like, where they attach. I don't need you to memorize this, but I do want you to have knowledge of what these muscles do, right? It's in your body and you should know how to train it. So if you're having problems at your shins, we need to know how to train the toe flexors. So when it comes to the muscles below the knee, there's a ton. And honestly, I can't go through all of them, nor do I need to. Basically, what I've decided to do is below the knee, I'm going to call these muscles the Magnificent Seven, because there's really 7 major muscle groups that are going to be trainable and going to be a focus of our training. So we're going to start off with kind of the deepest layer, which is going to be the deep toe flexors, and there is technically 2 of them. The first one is going to be the flexor halicis longus, and that is going to be the muscle that attaches to the big toe, the great toe, or the hallux, which is Hallux. And then we have the flexor digitorum longus, which is the FDL, which is going to attach the digits, which is toes 2 through 5. I'll be showing you that in a second. But these are going to be kind of the deepest layer of the shin, of the foot. Now, obviously, like I said, there's tons of muscles in the foot, but these are going to be super important muscles, and most people don't even think about them, know about them, and so let's get into it. So let's just take a look at the foot here. You should be able to see my anatomy app, and what I want you to notice is, obviously, here on the left, this is the left foot. If I go ahead and draw, this is our big toe, great toe, or the hallux, whichever of those you want to use. And obviously, I'm going to click here with you can see, let me highlight this. Right here in the green, that is going to be that infamous first metatarsal, which is super important. And if you see right where, I'm going to draw this dot here. So right where this green dot is going to be one of the 3 points of the tripod of the foot. So you've got your first metatarsal right here. Obviously, your toenail is right up here. But your first metatarsal is this green dot right here. The second point of your tripod of your foot is going to be the 5th metatarsal, which is out here, where the green dot's out there. So you got the 1st and the 5th. And then the 3rd is right underneath the heel bone. Picture there's a dot right under the center of your heel bone. Those 3 make up the tripod of the foot. So if I ever talk about keeping pressure on the first metatarsal, I'm talking about keeping pressure here, right here, and the ball of your foot right on the big toe. If I talk about keeping pressure on the 5th, that would be out here. If I say keep pressure on your heel bone or calcaneus, that's right underneath your heel. So this is a very important landmark, because the big toe is super important. Without the big toe, we couldn't run. And what we're going to do is, like we said, we're going to take a look specifically at the muscles. So if we go here and I start to flip-a-roo, now one of the hardest things is just navigating this. So if I flip underneath, we can see that if I click here, this is going to be the FHL, halicis, whichever you want to say. It attaches to the big toe, goes right underneath, and then what I want you to notice is, you can see I love this app, it's so awesome. Runs right underneath the big toe, then goes underneath the ankle bone. So the ankle bone is right here, right? It's there. Your inside ankle bone is right where my mouse is. It runs underneath there, and then what it does is it actually runs to the outside of your fibula. So that, remember, the outside bone is the fibula, the inside's the tibia. So you can see there that it goes and attaches about halfway up the fibula, which is the bone in green, right? That's your outside bone. So that is the FHL. I just want you to know the basics so you can see. Goes from the big toe, goes right along the inside of the foot, then comes underneath. You can see right here, right? It comes underneath the ankle bone. So I want to, right? The ankle bone would be right here. Goes right underneath there. Then crosses over, crisscross applesauce, and heads to the outside, okay? So obviously the job of that is to flex the toe. So if we go here, right, you can see that it's to flex the toe. The muscle shortens when we flex the toe down, which we're going to understand in a few minutes is going to be wildly important to pronate the foot. So if we don't have the ability to create relative toe flexion, we won't be able to get pronation at the foot. So notice how when we go toe flexion, it's going to shorten that muscle, and then it's going to impact that. Now, if I go back here, the toe flexors do assist in plantar flexion, or your calf raise motion, so to speak, or your heel raise, but it's a very weak plantar flexor, so that is not its primary job, even though it's part of that. I just want you to know. Okay, so the FHL is the big toe. Now, the FDL, this is the interesting thing. So if we look here, it's kind of funny. You would picture that the FHL would start at the big toe and then actually run right up, and you feel like the FHL should actually be where the FDL is. So it's interesting when we look at the flexor digitorum longus, you can see here that it attaches to the smaller toes, right? Toes 2 through 5. That's the digitorum stands for the digits, which are the smaller, right? It does the same thing where it crosses underneath the ankle bone, just like the FHL. This is called the tarsal tunnel down here, where there's a lot of issues with people that tend to get a lot of issues through here, whether that's posterior tibialis tendonitis or anything like that. But notice how the FDL goes to the outer 4 toes, but then it does a crisscross with the FHL, and actually the FDL comes and attaches and runs along the inside of the tibia, which is super interesting. So this is the inside of the tibia we're looking at on the left foot. And if you notice, the FDL runs right on the inside ridge, right in that area where so many people feel tightness, pain, shin splints. So this is super important, right? When it comes to shin splints, we have 7 major muscles that are below the knee that attach the shin and foot that we need to assess, train, deal with if we're having pain problems or issues, right? Even if we're not having pain or problems, well, we want to increase performance, so we should know how to train these muscles. So it is super interesting. When people have shin splints, people will blame the tibialis anterior. They'll say, oh, you've got tight calves. No one ever says your flexor digitorum longus might be having troubles, right? So notice how this is super interesting to me, that no one ever says, oh, when you've got shin splints, you've got an FDL issue, right? Or you've got tightness in your flexor digitorum longus, or weakness, or it's overloaded. So, or right, we saw that the FDL and FHL are responsible for plantar flexion, but remember, they're weak plantar flexors. So we could have a situation where the calves and soleus, which are the strong plantar flexors, are abysmally weak, and then the toe flexors have to do the work. So I want you to think. Say you have the soleus, who's supposed to be this big, strong badass when it comes to the shin and plantar flexion and running and all of the above. Remember, the soleus is going to do around 6 to 8 times body weight work, so an egregious amount of work. Let's say the soleus is piss weak. Well, if the soleus and calves are incredibly weak and not doing their job, now the plantar flexors, the FDL and the FHL, have to do that work or assist in plantar flexion way more than they should. And you can understand why potentially, now this is just a hypothetical scenario. It doesn't mean that this is the case with everyone. You could see how maybe if you have an incredibly weak soleus, that the FDL and the FHL have to work 10 times harder to create plantar flexion. And then no wonder why the inside of the shin is tight, pissed off, and angry after a long run or after intervals. So I find it incredibly interesting to me that they do this crisscross, that the FHL, so the great toe flexor, goes over to the fibula, and then the digits, or the FDL, crosses over to the tibia. It's kind of like this weird crisscross. I don't know why. Have no clue why God decided to do the crisscross. You think that the FHL would go straight up. There has to be a reason for it. I don't know. It's just cool. But I want you to have a good look and be like, wow, so many people feel tightness, tension, and problems in the FDL, okay? And remember, both of them flex the toes. Obviously, the FHL deals just with the great toe, and the FDL deals with the lesser four toes, okay? So this is important because one of the things that we talked about is when it comes to pronation, right? I'm going to pull that up here in a second. So when it comes to pronation, right, I've got this great visual. I don't know if in this video, if this represents the posterior. I think this right here, this top ligament is the posterior tibialis tendon. And then this one over here might be the FHL right here. That doesn't matter for this video. So this is a great example of pronation. Okay, I just want to play it. So watch this. Remember, pronation is when the foot stretches and loads. So a lot of people are going to use the word collapse. If you want to use the word collapse, it's fine, but I hate that word because it's just a stretch. The foot is stretching. So when our foot pronates, notice how all 3 arches of the foot lower into the ground. The bones stretch and spread out. So ready? I notice right now how these bones on the inside of the foot are going to open. So look at the bones right here where my mouse is. Those bones are going to open. The foot is going to stretch like a trampoline. So boom. Notice how these bones have opened. The muscles and the tendons. So notice these tendons right here are going to stretch. And what happens when something gets stretched? It's primed to contract, right? We load to explode. So when these muscles of the foot are loaded, which are going to be supinators and plantar flexors, so notice how when we pronate, we're going to be in dorsiflexion. What we do is we stretch out all the muscles on the backside of, right, here's the calcaneus and heel bone. Here's the talus. The talus is that bone that needs to move. So this bone right here, right? This bone right here is the talus. So this is the talus in green. And then this is the calcaneus. Well, it switched colors on me. Sorry about that. So the talus is this bone right here. And that bone needs to slide back this way for our shin to fall forward in dorsiflexion, which allows our foot to pronate, right? Now, if we can't, like I said, if we can't get good length, that should have not been a tongue twister. If we can't get good length out of the toe flexors, we're not going to be able to get that talus bone to slide back. So I just want you to notice how in this position here, which is pronation, the arch has lowered to the ground, right? These bones right here, notice how there's openings in the bones. The bones on the inside of the foot are opening. The arches are all lowering. And then what we have right here is we have toe flexion. So I know this is hard for someone who doesn't have advanced knowledge of biomechanics, but the toe is the toe is flexing. This is relative flexion of the big toe, okay? So the big toe has to flex to achieve pronation. So if we suck at toe flexion, we're not going to get into good pronation, okay? So let's let this play again. I just want you to, this isn't necessarily dealing with, I just want you to look at pronation because obviously it's interacting. So there's supination. We're going to watch that again. So pronation, stretching and down, toe flexion. And then ready? Supination is when the arch raises up. Notice we get that nice, strong, rigid arch. So pronation, stretch, supination, rigid foot so we can push off. There's that nice high arch for supination. Pronation, the foot flattens. It becomes adaptable, mobile. And then we go into, look at that nice high arch. So now we're in, this is supination where we have a nice Roman arch. The bones now here have closed on the inside of the foot. And notice now, if you look at the toe, that is now in relative dorsiflexion. So if you look here, now the toe is bent, the big toe. Sorry, I'm drawing over the place, my goodness. The toe is in dorsiflexion now that the foot is supinated. So we need to stretch the big toe to supinate, and we need to flex the big toe to pronate. So that's super important. So that should help us know that if we're struggling with one or the other, right? But I just want you to take a look at that, and now you can see that when the foot pronates, that we're going to get relative toe flexion. So let's let this go down one more time. And there it is. So pronation. Notice the big stretch out of all those muscles. Big stretch. I want you to think of pronation as a stretch. It's like when you land on a trampoline. The trampoline yields and stretches and then uses that elastic recoil, uses that energy to obviously fire you if you're on trampoline, just like a bow and arrow if you stretch it. So let's go back to our anatomy app, right? So we've got a better understanding of these muscles, right? And now we have to understand, well, how do we improve the range of motion, right? How do we improve the connective tissue of these muscles? Well, we know that when these muscles contract and shorten, they flex the toe, which is kind of curl the toe down. Obviously, when they contract, they provide plantar flexion. So how do we put length? How do we put a stretch on these? Well, we just saw it, that we have to put the big toe in extension, right? So to build good quality connective tissue, to make sure that we have good range of motion of these muscles, which is going to impact, obviously, when we run and all that stuff. So here's what I want to show you. So now we're going to see what happens. Hopefully now you're like, oh, okay, I've got this FDL and FHL. So let's now look at how do we create good quality range of motion, right? And when we talk range of motion, we're talking about training at length or to length, which means we're going to put the muscles in a stretch to build the connective tissue and range of motion. So we're going to go in the opposite direction, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this down for a second, and I'm going to pull up some of the photos that I just downloaded. So where is it? Okay, all right, nope, there. Oh, I gotta find the right photo. Okay, so perfect. So here's me, and obviously right here you can see that I am in what looks like a soleus and calf stretch. Obviously more soleus when we're doing a bent knee versus a straight leg. So right, this is the long side and the back, and then the short side is the front side of the shin. Now, if we look here, remember, the toe flexors, the FHL and the FDL, need to be put at length. Well, if flexion is shortness, then extension is length. So look at here. Notice how I've got my big toe, and I've actually got the other four toes up on what looks like a mini slant board, but this one is called the dorsiflex. I have it specifically for stretching the big toes. So notice the bend in the toe, and that bend in the toe is extension, and that creates a supination, which is going to put length under. So I want you to remember that the FHL runs here, back side. So sorry, it goes under here, and then obviously crosses over. So to put length, so remember the FHL and FDL are plantar flexors and toe flexors. So notice here I'm in dorsiflexion. So that is going to put length under the backside of the FHL and FDL. And then I'm in toe extension, and that is it. So in this position, right, I should feel a posterior stretch, so stretch in the backside. And then obviously I'm going to feel stretch under the arch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to obviously do our isometric work where I would be pressing my toes down. So I'd be flexing my toes down, and that is going to start to develop the connective tissue of the plantar of underneath the foot. So obviously the plantar fascia is there too. It's going to develop the range of motion I need out of the FHL and FDL. And of course, I could do this where I bias just the big toe. So let's say we just wanted to do the big toe by itself, so the FHL. Let's say I just wanted to do that. Okay, so if I go here and I go to my YouTube, so let's go here. Okay, all right, perfect. So look at here. In this example, notice how I have my big toe. This is called an accu-mobility ball. It's like a lacrosse ball that doesn't move, and it's actually a little bit, it gives a little bit more. So in this case, one more time, I have extension out of my toe. That is going to put length under the FHL. My other four toes you can't see in this video. My other four toes are not on the accu-mobility ball. So I'm focused just on my FHL, right? You can bias just the FHL. So if I had my four smaller toes, so toes 2 through 5, up in a stretch and my big toe down, that would be focused on the FDL. And notice how here I'm just have my big toe in a stretch, and then this is more a dynamic stretch. I'm going into dorsiflexion to create that lengthening component. And then I should feel that stretch in the backside. Now, I could do this as an eccentric. I could do this as isometrics. But I'm just happen to be going through kind of a rocking motion, just as an example. But you can see here that there, once again, is putting length into this. And hopefully you're starting to now see, okay, to train the connective tissue of my toe flexors, I need toe extension and dorsiflexion. And then we pull out our arsenal of holding isometrics, pushing isometrics. We could do low intensity. So I could go here and push at like 30%, or I could push at 100% of max. We could do an eccentric, right? I could do, obviously, so another thing I want you to think is I can do like a calf raise. So I'm going to pull this up just here. So let's say I go here. Where is it? Sorry, I'm pulling up the photos. One sec, I've got to find the right photo. I downloaded these for this little presentation. Sorry, takes me a second. Okay. By the way, that's actually just a great shot right there of that is shortening the toe flexor. So that's an exercise that I might have you do or might not have you do. This is to shorten. So your toes just sticking straight out, and then you try to basically curl it to the block. It's way harder than it seems. Sorry, I want to find this example. Maybe I don't have this example pulled up. Okay, sorry. Okay, there we go. Awesome. So here's a great example. So remember, we don't just do isos. Isos are amazing, but we want to do eccentrics. We want to do concentrics. But here's what I want you to think. So I want you to think of a normal calf raise where you just do calf raises, okay, with your knee straight. Then I want you to think of more a soleus bias calf raise where you have your knee bent and you're seated. So seated calf raise is a little bit more biased to the soleus. Now I want you to picture that here is an example of how we bias a calf raise, air quote, to be a toe flexor raise. So if I roll up a towel, you can see that I'm loading, I've got the big toe stretch, which is extension. And then if I go through a calf raise, Now I'm going to bias the FHL and FDL. It doesn't mean the calf isn't working, doesn't mean the sole isn't working. It's just going to shift the demand more to the toe flexors. So you can picture that if I had my toe rolled up on a towel, or if I had my toe on a slant board or a small little wedge, that is going to be a way that we can turn a calf raise into a toe flexor raise, and that is really cool. And it just shows you, right, that specific tissues need specific loading. It's not that your toe flexors don't work when you do calf raises or soleus raises, but if we want to shift more work, and one of the hardest things is muscles are going to steal force, meaning the calves and soleus want that force to get stronger, faster, better. And weak tissue and deconditioned tissue is generally going to want to avoid being loaded. That's the stress shielding effect. So one of the strategies we can use is by loading a calf raise where we now add in the toe extension. You can see here that if we're in a position, this is actually a leg is behind. So in this case, this leg is further back than the other leg. This is going to be a little bit of a plantar flex position, so it's a little bit less stressful. Then if we look at this bottom photo, you can see that that is us in a dorsiflex position. That's going to put the most length. So we can do isometrics here. So I want you to picture we roll up a towel, we put our leg back. We could do isos where you just try to squash the towel under your big toe. We could do calf raises. We could go up and do an eccentric calf raise. There are so many options. We can go low intensity for long duration for a little bit of slow twitch. We could do high intensity for a few reps for fast twitch. Okay? Starting to see it. Boom. But what I wanted to show you in those photos was, where is it? So, sorry. It's hard to see which photo's which. So if we look at this is that example earlier. We can see that if we wanted to do the opposite, so if we wanted to get rid of the toe flexor, so I want you to think that, say we're trying to just get the soleus and calf and we don't want the toe flexors to get involved. Notice how in this scenario, I want you to look at the bottom photo. Instead of the toe being in a stretch, we've kind of got you see the toe in the bottom scenario. If we put the towel further back, so now the toe is plantar flex versus dorsiflex, now we've taken away the toe flexors, right? Which is something that we can do. And that is a great strategy. I'm sorry. I know that's annoying for me to keep pulling up photos. I should have had them all pulled up before time. So look at this. So in this case, I'm just showing you the opposite. So say we wanted to limit the toe flexors and have this bias more the calf and soleus. So notice how in this case, you see how we have the toe draped over the edge. Now what happens is we won't get a massive stretch in the FHL or FDL. They're still going to work, but now we've limited their ability to get a big stretch. So this is going to bias more the calf and soleus, and it's going to be more a pronation. So remember, if we've got toe flexion, it's going to be more a pronation bias. So if we're trying to, say you've got a stiff foot that has a high arch and doesn't pronate well, we can do calf raises like this to help unlock the foot. But I want you to see how if we don't put a stretch on the big toe, so you can see here, once again, if we drape the big toe over a ledge or edge, that is going to basically limit the toe flexor's ability to hop in and do work. So this would be a great example that I talked about earlier. Let's say someone has like toe flexors that are doing way too much work and the calf and soleus is just not getting enough load. And especially when this is someone, here's what I want you to picture. This is someone who, when they do calf raises, like grips the ground with their foot. So basically all the muscles of the foot, the FHL and the FDL, steal the load. And then the poor soleus is sad because they can't get enough load. This is a great example of what we could do, okay? So all these examples are important. Now, here's what I want you to look. Notice how when we do stuff like this, you see how we've got the toe flexors under load. So when we do stuff like lunges, when we do stuff like split squats, that is going to be another way where we get a little bit of isometric load through the toe, through the FHL and stuff like that. So if you look at this example, I'm doing a diagonal stretch, which is very similar to kind of a split squat. If you notice that my back foot, I've got my toe flexors under length. So this is a great way. So whenever we do a split squat, that is going to be loading those toe flexors. Now, this is what I really wanted to pull up, is why it matters that we have good range of motion out of the toe flexors. So when we go to push off right here, which is toe off, notice how in toe off, I've got that big toe extension, which is supinating the foot, creating a rigid arch. So this is a supinated foot. We've got big toe extension. We've got arch in the foot. And that is going to put the FDL and FHL under maximal stretch and length, which is obviously what helps us to push off, right? Now, here's what I want you to picture. If we have poor quality connective tissue of the FHL and the FDL, meaning they can't get to length, or we don't have good range of motion, we've got shitty quality connective tissue, or we've got neurological tension, mechanical tension, I just want you to think that we have trash range of motion and poor quality connective tissue of those two muscles. Well, what's going to happen is when we go to push off or toe off, we are going to put a big stretch under those muscles, and then they are going to experience way more strain than they should, which is going to lead to pain, problem, plateaus. It's going to lead to tightness. And now you can see how we might start to get really tight and angry on the inside of the shin if we're not able to get good length and good quality length out of those two muscles. Now remember, this is a little bit of a chicken and the egg conversation. Where is it that the toe flexors are strong and the soleus and calf are weak? And if the soleus and calves are weak, they're asking the toe flexors to do too much work, and then we get pain, problems, and tightness on either the FHL or the FDL or both? Or is it that the soleus and calf are doing pretty good, and then the FHL and FDL are weak, and that's causing the issues, right? So is it the strong stuff that's getting tired because it's doing all the work, or is it the weak stuff that's just lagging behind? The answer is it doesn't really matter. I'm just highlighting the importance of training our freaking toe flexors. But we can see how every single step we take, or whenever we run and walk, and the faster we run, the more we need those superstars to have good range of motion. So we see how if we have bad toe extension, it is going to put abnormal stress and strain through the FHL, the plantar fascia. This is why a lot of people who have plantar fasciitis have horrible range of motion of their big toe. So they've got a stiff big toe, which doesn't move. Now, remember, we're talking about how do we put a stretch on these muscles, okay? And then, right, your FHL runs along the inside of the shin, and then your FHL to the fibula. But this is super important. So remember, when we have issues, if we have ankle pain, if we have foot pain, if we have shin pain, if we have knee pain, we have to assess the muscles that are working. And like we said, this first video is talking about 2 of the Magnificent 7. I want you to have in-depth knowledge of the 7 main muscles below the knee, which in my opinion are the most grossly neglected and undertrained muscles of the human body. If we treated these 7 muscles like the pecs, the lats, the abs, the glutes, and the hamstrings, I think we would have way less injuries, way less pain problems. And it's mainly because, like I said, people, A, don't know that you can bias these different muscles. B, don't care. And most of the time, it's people don't care about training an area until it's injured or in pain, right? Normally, when stuff hurts, then people start to explore. But this is the importance of when we train, right? We can focus our training on the calf, but we can also, like I said, we also need to bias the toe flexors. Now, we can do work at length, so we can train the toe flexors at length, which is going to be our priority. Remember, most of the connective tissue gains are coming from when we train in a lengthened position. So that means doing lots of work where we've got big toe extension, and then obviously if we add in dorsiflexion, that's another work. So I want you to picture, I could literally set up in almost a split squat. I could roll up a towel underneath my foot and then just do hard isometrics down, and that would be a way of training the toes at length, right? Which is great. But I want you to now see why these guys are heavily involved in running. So I'm not saying that all your pain and tightness on the inside of the shin is the toe flexors. But you saw the FDL lives right there. Now, we've also got the posterior tibialis. We've also got the Achilles tendon. Obviously, this is meet the muscle, so I'm not talking about the Achilles tendon, but I will kind of have to because the soleus and calf become the Achilles tendon. We've got, like I said, we've got other muscles. So when we're having issues, we need to assess, train, explore, and gain in all the layers. So I want you to think. Layer 1 is the calves. Layer 2 is the soleus, which is deeper. And then layer 3 is the deep toe flexors and the posterior tibialis. So these are the deepest layer, which obviously the deepest muscles are generally the most neglected. So if we struggle to pronate, okay, we probably suck at toe flexion. If we have tightness, pain, and problems here, we need to assess and train. So here's the funny thing. We're just going to train it no matter what, right? And what that, I was going to show one more. That's just a fun quote. Don't worry about that. I had one more that I wanted to show. So you can see there, that's just another example where if we toe flexion, so if we droop the big toe, it's going to help to achieve pronation, okay? So, but let's look at this on, so obviously, like I said, this is a little bit dynamic. If I go here, right, and if I go to my Instagram, I was looking to see, so if I go here, okay, here's a great example. So if you haven't been assigned the soleus slouch, I'm surprised because it's one of my go-tos as, okay. So what I want you to watch is we're going to watch this video now with the kind of the deep dive that we've experienced with the FDL and FHL. So we know to build good quality connective tissue and to really put that isometric load into it, we need toe extension and then we need dorsiflexion. So what I want you to look at is this is going to be an FHL slouch. And now you're going to see how this is an example of training.
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take a
connective tissue here. So I'm going to let this play for a second. So don't worry. Once it gets going, I don't have the ability to pause and scroll because it's just Instagram. So here's just one example. I'm going to show a couple of specific loading. Remember, you are still training other muscles. Whenever we do a calf raise, you are loading your toe flexors. But the important thing to realize is there's multiple muscles that want to steal the stress of an exercise because remember, stress is load and load is gain, and muscles love being loaded. So in this example, what I want you to look at is one more time. Look, I've now put my big toe on a small little wedge. That's just a little wedge. It's not very big. That puts a stretch under the FHL. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the soleus slouch, which is basically where we bend the knee. So there it is. So there's toe extension, dorsiflexion. So I've put tons of length under the FHL. Now what I'm going to do to add more load is I'm going to round and curl and basically do a toe touch or a Jefferson curl. And basically what I want you to think right here, my FHL is under length. And as I roll, round, and peel and slouch, I am basically increasing the isometric load through the toe. And to get back up, what I'm doing is on the way back up, I'm pressing through my big toe and I'm loading that FHL. So notice, when I went up and down, there was no change in my knee angle. There was no change in my foot angle. But to increase the load, I was just rounding over and doing what looks like a toe touch, or like I said, we're slouching. So this is an example of specific loading for the FHL, and it's isometrically based, so it's going to be more connective tissue, right? And on the way up, I'm having to isometrically drive through that foot. So that is an example. So you see, toe extension, dorsiflexion is maximal. Now, we don't always have to be in both. We could just do toe extension. We could just do dorsiflexion, but remember, we need the extension out of the toes. So I'm going to pull up another example just so you start to see a little bit more of this. Sorry, I don't have all these exercises saved right this second. So I'm gonna scroll down. So here's another great example. So one more time, you see how there is an exercise where my heel is floating, and then I have this thing called the Toe Pro, which is used to train your toe flexors. By the way, you don't have to buy this, but one of the best things I've ever purchased is from a company called Human Locomotion. It's called the Toe Pro. Basically, it's a rubber apparatus that allows you to stretch your toes and basically do calf raises and various exercises. So it's awesome. If you ever wanted to buy it, it's very helpful. Notice I've got the Toe Pro here, and what that's doing is that's putting my toes under a stretch, so you can see they're under that big toe extension. And then all I'm doing here is I'm doing a hip thrust, and my heel is not on the ground. So this right here is not for my glute, right? There is no way my big, strong glutes are going to get overloaded when I can do hip thrusts with hundreds of pounds. What's happening here is my toe flexors are having to work. So there it is. There is specific training. So remember, we want every area of our body to be getting stronger, faster, better. 5 years from now, I want you to be a better version of yourself. And we know if we don't specifically train and load stuff, over time it will get weaker, worse, or wear down, right? So it is super important that when it comes to training, that we do specific work for the FHL and FDL. And now I know when you're doing split squats, when you're doing lunges, when you're doing sled pushes, you are training them. So I want to be very careful to say that there are tons of times in strength and conditioning where we are doing and challenging those muscles. When you push a heavy sled, you are going to load the bejesus out of those muscles. But just like anything, we don't just do squats for our legs. We do squats, we do deadlifts, we do side lunges, we do hamstring curls, we do RDLs, So it's important to realize, just like that, we want to have lots of different ways we load. So sled push might be great, but it's not going to necessarily isometrically be enough time under tension for that. Okay, let's see if I can find some others. I just want to show you examples so you start to see that even in my own training, I am very specifically loading. So like here's an example of this. Notice how in this, I'm going to get a little bit of the FHL. So right here, I'm just doing isometric loading. I'm going to get a little bit because I've got a slant board here, right? But let me find a color. Now, I think this is a great comparison. So in this example, notice how at the bottom, let's see if I can pause it at the bottom. I don't think I'll be able to. Okay, perfect. This is a great counter example. So in this position, notice how my toes are off the ledge and they're not under a stretch. So notice how here I am strategically and purposely placing my first metatarsal in midfoot on the slant board, but I'm not placing my toes. This is on purpose. So remember how I said if we want to actually bias more calf and soleus, we actually need to kind of not let the toes go into a big stretch and extension. So here, at the deepest part of the stretch, my toes are up in the air, which means that I'm not placing the FHL and FDL under maximal stretch. Now, they are still going to work. They are still going to get loaded, but I'm shifting more of the work into the calves and soleus and posterior tibialis. So I just want you to see how this is just a small change that here, yes, at the top of the range of motion, you're going to see my toes get a little bit of load. But remember, most of the gains are when we're under a big stretch for connective tissue and muscles in general. So in the deepest stretch, my toes are not getting as much load. So here when I go to contract, so when I go to calf raise, my toes can't contribute as much, which means that more work will go specifically into the calves and soleus. So watch when I raise up, my toes can't work until the top. So ready here, boom. Now at the top, they are getting a little bit of work at the top. But to get out of the hole, that is coming from the midfoot and less of the toes. Okay? So here's another example. Sorry, some of these are longer videos with that. I just want to provide you multiple examples to show you the importance of specifically training your great toe. Okay? Let's see if I can find it. I'll always have toe stuff here. Okay, let me find something. Sorry. I like to use my own training to show you that what I'm teaching you isn't something that I just say, oh, you go ahead and do your fun toe stuff. I'm going to go do all this cool stuff. No, this is important to me. And remember, there's more than 7 muscles, but there are 7 major muscles. The magnificent 7 are the 7 muscles I want and need you to know. I need you to know where they are, what they do, how to train them. And specifically, I always want you to know how to put those muscles at length, right? Because length is where we get gains. It's not that we shouldn't know what they do in a short position. Of course, your toe flexors are going to curl and get shorter. But I really want you to know, how do we put this muscle at length? Because that's going to be where most of your connective tissue gains are. And most, just in general, that's going to be where the muscle grows the most. Now, this is actually a good example of how do we stretch. So if I'm going to stretch the opposite toe I'm thinking of something else. That's just me. It's because I've been rambling too much. Probably going to end this video here in a second because I don't want this to get too long. I'm going to try to find one more example. Oh, there's a great example. So notice how when we run uphill versus flat, this is why people who do lots of hiking, lots of uphill running, trail runners, ultramarathoners tend to get more issues with their FHL, with their Achilles, with their plantar fascia, with their heel bone. So notice here, this is a great example of, look at how much toe extension we have because of the trail shoes and because of the slope. So that is putting look at number one, look at how much dorsiflexion we have. Look how far the knee is in front of the toe. That's tons of dorsiflexion. So that those toe flexors are under crazy amounts of length, right? So this shows you that in this situation, people would say, oh, well, I need strong calves to run uphill. You do. Oh, I need a strong soleus to run uphill. You do. And of course, you know my favorite muscle is the soleus. But remember, the toe flexors are there. They're important. They're trainable, and they're often neglected. But look at this. No wonder why uphill running is a great use of your toe flexors. But remember, over time, if they are starting to lag, if your toe flexors can't keep up with the amount of vertical gain you're running in a week, which is how much uphill run you're doing, you can see how this is more stressful. That's why if someone has plantar fasciitis, the last thing we're going to have them do is do lots of fast uphill running, right? Because it's going to yoink on that plantar fascia, right? And stuff like that. So I think this is super important. I think that actually I did want to show you that. So in the shoe, this is the final thing I'll do is, where's the shoe? Look at that. I should have done this from a second. I should have just gone to that menu. Okay, so here's an example of what a toe spring does in the shoe. So notice how the toe spring actually puts the foot in dorsiflexion, which puts length under those muscles. Now, in our thought process, it would be like, oh, well, isn't that a good thing because it's putting under length? What happens is this is very similar to when you have a heel lift for a squatting shoe. So when you have a heel lift, since you're already in a position of plantar flexion, you don't have to have as good of dorsiflexion to be able to squat deeply. So same here. When this has a toe spring, it means that you don't have to go through as much big toe extension. So this is helpful. A toe spring is helpful if we are having like plantar fascia issues or stuff like that. But in the long run, this would actually start to mean that this toe would start to lose range of motion, because think, a normal toe is resting flat, and then as we run and do all that stuff, it's going to get a big stretch and then go down, big stretch and go down. But if it's up here all the time, it's actually not going through as much range of motion. So a toe spring is not the devil. It's not the end of the world. In fact, if you're having issues with plantar fasciitis or you're having whatever, it can help. But it is not going to, we don't want to view this as, oh, well, this is putting a stretch, this is strength training it. No. We want to think this as just a tool that we can use. So I don't want you to think that you need to buy a shoe that does not have a toe spring, but I want you to know now how a toe spring would impact you. So let's say you do run in a shoe that does have a big toe spring, and you've been having a lot of issues where that FDL and FHL are located. Maybe you try buying a shoe without a toe spring and seeing if that takes off a little bit of the stress, or vice versa. Maybe you've been running with a shoe like an Ultra and you've been having tons of issues with your toe flexors. And then you add a toe spring and it takes a little bit of that off of it. So toe springs are part of the modern shoe. It's just most shoes have a toe spring. I want you to see what it does. It puts length under that. Regardless or not, if we're wearing a shoe with a toe spring or not, we need to prepare for the demands of length under the toe flexors. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. And I know this has been a long video to say something very simply, which is we are going to train our toe flexors. But now you have a way better understanding. So you have the FDL and the FHL. Remember, FDL is on the inside of the tibia, but goes to the outside four toes. The FHL is on the fibula on the outside, but goes crisscross applesauce to the big toe. These guys flex the toe in plantar flex. They're weak plantar flexors, right? And to put a stretch on them, we have to extend the big toe and dorsiflex for a maximal stretch. We are going to treat this like any other area. We're going to do connective tissue training. We're going to do muscular training. We're going to do isometrics, eccentrics, concentrics. And these are 2 of the 7 muscles of the Magnificent 7 that I need you to know where they are, what they do, how to stretch them, how to load them. Because when you have pain problems or issues, or if you have a lack of performance, these should be trained. Because if we don't train these, right, if we don't train to gain, we're maintaining. And if we maintain, eventually over time, because of life, entropy, injuries, whatever, we will slowly erode and lose and atrophy, right? So we don't want these guys to atrophy. We don't want poor quality connective tissue. So we need to know how to train that. And hopefully those couple examples start to show you how we are getting a lot of that in training, but we need to specifically train it and prioritize it, because these 7 muscles not only impact the foot, they impact the shin, they impact the knee, they impact the hip. They are super important. And now you know a little bit more about your toe flexors. And this was episode 1 of Meet Your Muscles.